2.
Alright, so we're at a point where we're going to put the linings inside the sleeves so we can bias tape them. And if you have multiple linings because you're making like a Rapier-legal doublet, then you'll have to insert the linings one at a time. You'll want your fashion piece turned right side out, okay? What you'll do is you'll take the innermost lining, the lining layer that's not going to be seen, the one that's going to be sandwiched between the fashion layer and the regular lining layer. You'll have it inside out. You insert your arm. You want to make sure that you're lining up the cap of the sleeves. The cap is the little point at the top. That's the cap of the sleeve. So make sure that those 2 points line up. You insert your hand and then just put the sleeve on. It's the easiest way to get it in there. Alright? And then what I do is I pull it up here. I try to make sure the seams line up. Make sure you open up your seams so that they're nice and flat, and give it a little shake. Okay? And that will kind of help it settle inside. And I take the actual lining layer. This is the layer that if you turn the sleeve inside out, you would see. Alright? And again, it's inside out. So essentially I'm placing wrong side to wrong side if you really think about it. So again, I insert in, give it a little shake. And what I will end up doing is pinning this all the way around to hold it in place at the wrist and at the armhole, so that it looks something like this. Okay, can't really see it, but it is all pinned inside there. Right? This way I can now bias tape the armhole. Now the sleeve portion, the arm's eye portion up at the top here, this will be the easy part, okay? Because it will fit over the arm of your sewing machine. Most people have little tiny wrists, and that won't fit over the arm of the sewing machine. And what you end up having to do is sew on the inside, with the foot right here. I'll show you on the machine here in a second. So it can be a little bit of a pain putting the bias tape on, but it's still much easier than trying to, bag and sew it. So this is the easiest way. All right, so we're gonna move over to the machine, and we'll do that demonstration there. Right now I'm going to show you how to pin the linings into the doublet itself. Okay. Once I have my doublet constructed with all its embellishments, I've put my collar in that has been pad stitched right there. What I do is I lay the doublet fashion side up, okay, so that I can see the right side of the doublet. I have my 2 skirting pieces that have been bias taped. Now when I bias tape the skirting pieces, I bias taped them from the back along the bottom. I left the front unbias taped, because that will get done when we do the rest of the doublet. What I want to do is I want to find the center back of my doublet. To do that, the easiest way to do is just match up the side back seams, fold it in half, and look, there's the center of my doublet. Okay? If you want to, you can mark it with a little chalk mark, okay? Or you can stick a pin in it, however you want to mark it. Alright? So the skirting pieces will get pinned on first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the center back of the skirting piece up with the center back of the doublet here. Okay? Alright. And then I'm going to put a pin in this front corner, because this skirting piece will be eased in. Okay? You can see the skirting piece doesn't have the same, or it has the same curve, it's just they kind of fight against each other as we go. So the easiest way to do this is put one pin on each end, give it a little tug, and then put a pin in the center so that you can ease the two together. okay? You want to pin this in, and then we'll pin the lining in afterwards. And I'll show you how to do that here in a second. So, let me get this pinned in real quick. Take me a little while. Put as many pins in as you think is necessary. I put one in about every 3 inches or so. If you want to put them in a little bit more frequently, you can. But just remember, the more pins you put in, the more chance you have of running over them with your sewing machine. And that means bent pins, broken needles, that kind of thing. Not fun. If your skirt lining did not line up exactly with the top of your fashion piece, make sure when you're pinning the skirt in that you're lining it up with the fashion piece. If you have to, chop off the excess skirt lining if it confuses you. But yeah, take material, give it a little stretch, and boom, that one's pinned in, all nice and neat. And then I will do the other side, and I'll do it the exact same way. Start at my center back, which is nice and marked now because I already have one skirt piece in. Notice how the 2 pieces of bias tape just butt up against each other. I'm not overlapping them, okay? I'm just butting them right up against each other, and boom. In my doublets, I put in a rectangular piece that runs from hip to hip in the back so that I can put points in so that I can tie my pants into the doublet. Okay, that's the period thing to do, is to put panel so you can put points in. If I were doing that on this doublet, which I'm not, I would pin that after I pin these skirting pieces in. Okay. So these skirting pieces go in, and then I would pin the panel right on top of the skirting pieces. Again, lined up with the center back because, well, that's what I need to line it up with. Okay. Just about done here. Just want to get this done so I can show you guys the next step. The hardest part of pinning the skirting piece on is going to be up here near the doublet front, because that's where you have usually an opposite curve to your skirting piece, and so it can be difficult. So the pins may be a little bit closer together there than they are on the rest of the doublet, but again, your discretion how many pins you want to use. Alright, so I've pinned the skirting piece in, right side to right side, and you can see that. Okay, now what I will do, first layer I'm going to pin in is the lining layer that is going to be seen. Okay, I want the layer that is going to be seen. I think that's this layer. Oh, yeah, that's this layer. Usually I put the bias cut layer between the fashion layer and then my regular lining layer. So if I have 2 linings like this that look exactly the same, I just have to figure out which one's the bias cut layer. I did that by holding it up to the light, and I could see the grains of the thread that go biased. Yeah, it's the easiest way to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the right side of my lining layer, in other words, the side I want to be seen. I will place it against the right side of the doublet. And then what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the side back seams. Okay? Make sure they're all open. And then the easiest thing to do, after I get every edge all lined up, is to take the pin out and put it right back in through all layers. Okay? So I pinned that skirting piece in to hold it into place, basically, because it's a pain in the butt to try and pin all these layers at the same time. You can try it if you like, but you're going to get frustrated and start cursing. But if I pinch and hold, I can pull the pin right out and then put it right back where it was, only going through the lining layer as well. And I will do that all the way across the bottom, and then I just do the same thing with my next layer. So if it's a multiple layer doublet because it's a fighting doublet, I'll just, after I get this layer pinned in, I'll just take this layer, and again, I usually place the right side of it down towards the doublet. I'll line up my seams, take pin out, put pin back in, take pin out, put pin back in, just making sure all the layers connect, okay? Once that is done, okay, this is the other one I already have done, you'll sew a seam from, actually I'll sew it on this side so you can actually see the seam, from one end all the way to the other end, okay? Like all seams, I will now press this open. Since there's multiple layers, there'll be multiple seams to press open. But after I do that, all I have to do is take these lining layers, flip them over, kind of shake it out a little bit, and you can see, there's my doublet. Okay? And how the skirting piece came out, all nice and neat. You can see that little square piece I put in to add eyelets to, so I can have points to tie my pants to. That's what that piece is right there. Okay? And what I'll do with this is I'll pin it, I'll match up the seams, and I'll pin it all the way up and all the way around the armholes and stuff like that, so that I can sew this lining piece on. And what I'll do to sew this lining piece into the collar is up at the top, I will roll it a ½ an inch under, all the way across, and then I'm just going to do a whip stitch all the way around, all the way across the top. We'll demonstrate that after I get this all pinned up. We'll have to stop the video because that's going to take a while. Alright, so that's pretty much how you put your linings in. Isn't that cool? And it all works out very, very neatly. Alright, so we're going to sew the bias tape in the sleeve. One of the things I like to do with the sleeve is to try and kind of hide the ends of the bias tape so that they're not as noticeable, because you're going to have a little bit of bulk right there where the ends kind of overlap, because we're doing it in a circle. So if I were to pretend like this was the left arm of the sleeve, the seam, the inner seam, runs right there. The cap of the sleeve will end up in the middle of my back. We'll go over that when we put the sleeve actually in. So this seam will run here. So if I put the end of the bias tape down here, it'll be in my armpit. Anybody looking in my armpit deserves what they get. Alright? So that's where I'm going to start my row of bias tape. Now I'll take my piece off my machine so that I have my arm to deal with. Okay? I've got my sleeve inserted to where I want to start the bias tape. Like we did with the store-bought bias tape, it'll be folded, pre-folded, so you just want to unfold it and place the right side versus the right side. Now when I start this, I actually want to fold over the top inch or so of the bias tape, much like that. And so that's how I will start, because when it comes back around, okay, as the bias tape comes back around, the raw edge will go right over that fold to hide it. Okay? If you guys want to come a little bit closer and watch, this is not that difficult though. So I place it on there. I make sure the edge of the bias tape, it lines up with the edge of my sleeve. And again, just like before, I try to run the edge of the fabric right next to the edge of my foot. Okay? What's nice is, since I'm going around the circle, I don't have to backstitch. And this doesn't take very long, so I'm just going to go sew through this. As you go over your cap, you're going to have to curve the bias tape around the cap. And that's why it's called bias tape. It stretches. And try to actually almost turn the fabric, the sleeve as you go. Ooh, pin. And I broke my needle, so we're going to have to stop. All right, so we fixed our needle, broken needle. I do that all the time. If I don't break at least one needle on a doublet, it's not a good doublet. All right, so I've finished sewing around. I'm coming back to my other end. All right, so you can see where I started. Okay, and there's my fold. All right, I'm gonna keep sewing past that for about an inch or so. Okay. And you can see it just kind of overlaps the two pieces. And then what I'll do, that's where I'll trim off my bias tape, right about there. And what that does, once I take all my pins out, really try hard to make sure you take all your pins out. I've number of times I've sewn pins underneath bias tape and then found them, weeks later after I, got stabbed a few times. Said, oh, there must be a pin left in there. Now to sew the other side, the easiest thing to do is to actually turn the sleeve inside out, which will also help us sew the wrist, okay? But essentially, just like before, I'll take this bias tape, I'll flip it over, and I'll stitch it down. Okay? Trying to make the folded edge of the bias tape match that seam I just sewed around, all the way around the sleeve. Okay? Now for the wrist, like I said, it can be difficult to do because, wrists are smaller, and this wrist is not going to fit over the arm of my machine. So what I have to do is, again, sewing it from the inside first because I want to sew the fashion fabric. That's why turning it inside out works out so perfectly. What I want to make sure I do is I match up the start points. So since I started the armhole up here, that's the point, a point basically very similar on the wrist. It's going to be basically the same spot. And so, since I did this on my right side, the other sleeve, I'll make it for my left arm. Okay, so make sure you have make sure you do opposite arms so that they match up. So some sleeve patterns actually have a right and left arm, and so that'll make life a little easier too. So what I do is, you can see I insert my wrist this way underneath the foot. So instead of sewing around the arm, I'm sewing around the foot of the machine. And then again, I'll just do it the same way. I start with a little fold in the bias tape. And get my start point. Where's that? Where's my start point? Okay. Oops, I'm a little off. No, I'm right. Okay. That's right. Put a little fold. Find my start point, and again matching up the edge of the bias tape with the edge of the fashion fabric, right side to right side. Oh, get in there. It's being stubborn. This can be a kind of a pain in the butt to do, but yeah, again, you just want to sew, and again, you're going to sew maybe an inch at a time. Okay. Just roll your sleeve as you can, making sure everything that goes underneath the foot is nice and flat and only the layers you want to sew. And it's very easy to catch extra fabric in here. This can be a bit of a struggle, but like I said, it will work out in the end. So, almost there. If you come up with your own unique way of doing it and it works for you, more power to you. This is the best way I have found to do the wrist portion. You can hand sew it all if you want to. Okay, that will obviously make things a little easier, but yeah, a little bit more labor intensive. Okay, So just like the upper part of the sleeve, when I get to the end where it's folded, now I want to keep sewing for an extra inch or so that the ends of the bias tape overlap. Pull it out. And again, I will just kind of cut it off. And then, of course, again, remove my pins. And then once I get done sewing this in, I'll turn it inside out and sew the wrist on the other side. So that's basically how, the differences you have to do when you're doing your sleeve. Most important thing is when you start it with a folded end over, okay? And other than that, it's just like applying the bias tape like we discussed in a previous video. Alright, so I've pinned my lining, as you can see. Whoop, I just took a pin out. As you can see, I've pinned my lining all the way up the front. I've also pinned it around the armholes. That's to make sure everything matches up. I'm getting ready to fold over the top and pin it. First thing I did is I clipped the top for about 1/4 inch all the way across. That's because it's a curve, and the way you're going to fold it, it's going to need to be a bigger curve. And so in order to keep the fabric from stretching too much, you just give it a little clip about every 3 inches. And you're just using the tip of your scissors. You can see the little splits I put in. That's what a clipped seam is. And when you're doing curves, that's the best thing to do, so that, especially if it's a big curve like this. Now I'm going to take my shoulder seam, okay, and I want to fold it over about 1/2 inch, okay. And what I want to do is I want to find the shoulder seam on the other side, find that point where the shoulder meets the collar, and I want to place it in there. I want to give it a bit of a stretch to make sure that it's lining up, okay? I don't want the fabric to bunch too much. And then I'll place a pin in there, as long as I can find a sharp one. Alright. And I'll come to my top part of my, again, I'll fold it over 1/2 inch. I'm good. I'm going to look, I'm going to try and line that fold up with the seam on the other side. Okay? That way, I know everything's lining up. And then I'm going to tuck it in the middle here, make it as smooth as possible, put a couple extra pins in there to hold it in place. I've already done the other side of this, so you guys won't have to see me do it twice. So. So I've already done the other side of this, and so now I'm ready to do the middle. And again, I just kind of smooth it out. Tuck it under about 1/2 inch of fabric is what you're looking to tuck under. Okay? And then kind of ease it together so that it has no wrinkles in it. That's the idea, is we're trying not to wrinkle this lining. And it just kind of goes together. A few pins in it to hold it in place, and then we're going to whip stitch it in. So once I get this once I get set up, we'll start the video again, and I'll do some whip stitching so you guys can see it. Whip stitching is a very period stitch. It's been used for thousands of years, and it's extremely easy to do. Alright? Alright. See? Collar is all pinned in, ready to whip stitch. That's what it should look like. Okay? Alright. Alright. Alright, so this is actually some hand sewing. Oh no, you're going to have to actually hand sew. The horror. Alright? I want to use a thread that matches my lining, so I've got a lovely brown thread here to go with my brown lining. All-purpose thread is perfect. I use a tailor's thimble, which has a hole in the top, because it fits on my middle finger very, very nicely. You can use the standard thimbles that like this, and you can just hold them here. So when I use my thimble, I hold my needle pinched in between my thumb and index finger, and then I will push it through using the middle finger to push the thimble. It's a much more ergonomic way to use a thimble and everything else like that. I need a double strand of thread, so I'll go out to my full arm length and cut my thread off so I can have a double strand. I usually don't tie knots in my thread, but if you want to do that, go right ahead. Thread your needle and even up the ends of the thread. Okay, so that way you have basically an arm length of thread to use. You're going to start at the end. Since I'm not going to tie a knot, I'm actually going to do 3 stitches right at the end here, because that will secure it in place. So anytime I begin or end my thread, I'll just do 3 stitches, okay? I got my first pin since it's not in the way. So here's how I whip stitch, okay? I've got my fabric. I'm going to insert into the green material just under the fold of the fabric. So here's the fold of my fabric, and I'm right there. I'm about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch away from my initial stitch. And then I just immediately push the needle up so that it comes to the brown, and I snug it up. That's it. That's all you need to do. A whip stitch is a giant spiral. That's all it is. And so as you sew along here, I'll get my ends caught. You're just gonna, and again, each stitch, you can make them really, really close together. But I like 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. I've seen some people do like 16 stitches, and I think they're crazy. It's just too small. The length of the stitch is, again, about 1/8 of an inch. And I will just kind of go along here. I find it easiest to sit in a chair and cross my legs. And what's really fun is if you look at period pictures, you'll see pictures of tailors, and they're sitting just like this on top of a stool. This works. Okay, it gives me a good view of my material, except for if I get caught in a pin. Okay, I'm just going to take that one out. Okay, and allows me full range of motion with my arms, and it's very comfortable and very quick. I've seen some people who are good enough, they can do 3 stitches and then snug them up. I have to snug them up every time. I'm not that good. So you take your time and just try to do neat little stitches. It's kind of hard to see on this brown fabric, but you can see the row of stitches I've done there. And it should be, you shouldn't be able to really see it. But I'll do this all the way to the other side of the collar, and I'll take my pins out as I go, and that's how we're going to sew the lining into the collar. Okay?